month later, he found out through the grapevine that his role had been replaced. And the person replacing him was a foreigner. And it was a foreigner from the same country and of the same race as the manager who made him redundant, right?
Wow.
So he was upset, and he made a complaint alleging that he was selected for redundancy unfairly. He was selected because of his nationality.
Hello everyone, welcome to After the Bar. Before kicking off, I'd really appreciate it if you could show After the Bar some love by giving it a 5-star rating and hitting that follow button on Spotify. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, do subscribe to us and hit that thumbs up button. Hey, I'm Shulin and welcome to After the Bar. This is a podcast where I speak with all sorts of lawyers, past, present and future. And this season, we are going to talk about change. We're going to talk about navigating transitions. And in this particular episode, we're talking about when transition is foisted upon people unexpectedly. That's right, I'm talking about the big R word, retrenchment. And we're very fortunate to have invited 2 employment lawyers, Amarjit and Seow Hui, who are going to talk about how retrenchment can go well and when it doesn't go so well. And they're also going to talk about employment law issues. Welcome, ladies, to the podcast.
Hi, Shulin.
Hi, Shulin.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And we're going to just get started. So unfortunately, the climate is a bit uncertain and we are hearing about retrenchment happening in particular sectors like in tech, with startups, and even in the financial sector. Everyone's feeling a little on edge, a little bit anxious whether they could be next. So let's say I'm an employee in one of these sectors and I hear rumors that I could be next and there could be retrenchment. Tell me what I could do to protect my own interests.
So the first thing I would say is it's completely natural in such an uncertain environment to feel anxiety that an employee, you may be next, right? And to brace yourself for it and to try to prepare yourself for it. So the first thing I would normally say in such a situation is familiarize yourself with your contractual documents. Go dust the cobwebs off your employment contract, read it, look at the employee handbook and see if your company has a retrenchment policy. The more familiar you are with your contractual entitlements, the better you will be positioned to enter into a negotiation. So I would say that's usually the first step. And people generally feel better when they know more. So the knowledge will arm them with some confidence in the process.
Yeah. Thanks, Amarjit. How about you, Seow Hui? What do you think?
I think there's no point speculating. After all, these are just rumors. So as the famous meme saying goes, keep calm and carry on.
Well said. Yes, you're right. My hypothetical did say it's just a rumor, and I guess people listening to this, they are just thinking, what if I lose my job? And sometimes rumors are just rumors, right?
I've actually come across cases where the blacklist, that name list, is leaked. And sometimes it may not even be a finalized list. And then it causes a lot of mayhem. But yes, I understand we're all human. If I saw my name on that list, I'd probably panic as well. But to your question, it's really not much you can do. Just keep calm, wait for that conversation, weigh up your options, and you plan from there.
And yeah, maybe there's undue concern and you're panicking for no reason. Okay, let's say there is indeed a retrenchment and I've already signed my package. I've agreed. And then I hear that my colleague on the very next day gets a better retrenchment package than me. What can I do?
Okay, so we've already signed very little, but the first thing I would say is don't jump to conclusions because your colleague's circumstances may be different. There may be something that is not the same in terms of your package or their experience or something that would explain the difference. Now, if you really want to know, okay, can I get a better package on the back of what my colleague got? You could try to reopen discussions with the employer. Unlikely they will entertain, but you could still try. Not very much you can do.
Yeah. So I think the moral of the story is don't go and compare. I think once you do that, it's a can of worms. It's almost like comparing your bonus, year-end bonus, comparing your merit increment with your peers. It's a never-ending story, and
Yes.
most of the time it doesn't end well.
Yes. But does this mean also that we should negotiate harder when it comes to retrenchment packages? There's always some leeway.
I think there's always leeway, right? Not just in retrenchments, but in any exit situation. There's always leeway. There are always some levers you can pull. There's always some discussion to be had to see if you can get something better. Now, not just on the monetary front, but also the non-monetary front. So it's always worth giving it a shot. And if you've signed it, it means you are satisfied with it. So like Seow Hui says, at some point, just draw the line and move on.
Make peace. What are some non-monetary factors?
So I'll give you an easy one, right? So for employees who are trying to negotiate an out, a non-monetary factor that is not too complicated for employers to grant is, for example, to keep them on the insurance, the company's health insurance, until the end of the annual insurance cycle, because they pay for it annually anyway. So it's already been paid for the entire cycle. It doesn't cost them anything more to keep the employee and their dependents on for that period. That's one simple example.
And actually, in preparing these questions, I came up with a completely hypothetical situation myself. I was thinking, if let's say I really am so loyal to my company, I love my job, and maybe money is not the main concern, I really want to help out my company. Have you seen situations where maybe an employee volunteers to take a temporary pay cut, say 50%, and to stay on in the job and tide things over for the company? Do these situations happen?
Yes, I mean, not common, but they do happen, and I saw it happen a lot in the COVID period.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how it was like for COVID? So when COVID was over, they were reinstated to full pay?
So I didn't follow up, but I think that was always the understanding. It was always the understanding, and these things you're really operating on good faith. Employee acts in good faith by staying around, working for the success of the company, and when times are good, there is an expectation on employers to do the right thing, which is to reinstate, if not, offer higher pay.
Okay. So, ladies, unless we've been living under a rock, we would have heard about the Lazada retrenchment exercise. And I'm going to read from the Business Times. This is an article published on 11 January. Lazada's layoffs raise questions on responsible retrenchment practices. The stir over e-commerce player Lazada's mass layoffs on 3rd January has put employee rights and the role of labor unions once again in the spotlight. So tell me what your views are on this whole fiasco.
Okay, so a lot has been said about the Lazada retrenchment. Okay, I think it's a good learning opportunity for employers, right? Because things could have been done better. Now, broadly, I would say things could have been improved across two fronts. One is strategy, so the planning and the execution, and the other is the communication. In terms of strategy, the first is, okay, how do you notify employees, right? And in most cases, the advice is always give them as much notice as possible. You're going to impact their rice bowls. They have mortgages, they have children. Give them a runway to prepare so that they know, right? And most companies will do a soft announcement, town hall, and let people know, and then the affected employees will be notified. Now, Lazada actually hauled people in start of the new year, 3rd, 4th, 5th Jan. Some were called back from leave in the festive period, or just as they were preparing to start the new year. So from a timing perspective, not ideal. And they were sort of ambushed with the news of the retrenchment. All right, so the shock factor really took the employees by surprise. That could have been handled better, could have been planned, executed better. So one of the big criticisms, and this has been all over the papers, is that they didn't engage early enough with the unions as they ought to have as an entity which is unionized. Now, I think had they done that, a lot of the subsequent concerns around the adequacy of the retrenchment benefits, etc., could have been averted. Because our tripartite model in Singapore is a unique model. It's designed to ensure that there's a balance between employers, unions, and employees, right? And part of the facilitation process, the consultation process, is to avoid situations where, for example, the amount of benefits to be paid are not met, or lower amount is offered. Had they communicated at an appropriate juncture with the unions, I think the crisis that arose, the comms crisis, the PR crisis, could have been entirely averted. Because unions would have said, you're offering 2 weeks, whereas as a unionized entity, you should be offering a month. Other tech companies or companies in a similar industry are also offering more. So the benchmarking would have been done correctly. I think a lot can be learned. And I think there's also something to be said for companies treating their employees with dignity and respect as part of the process.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think that element has to be front and center and should be borne in mind by employers when they conduct such exercises.
And what are other things employers can do to cushion the blow of retrenchment?
Okay, so again, retrenchment usually arises because of business necessity. Employers often don't enjoy doing it. It's often very painful for them, for the managers, to have these conversations. How can they cushion the blow? The fact is that they have to part ways.
Yep.
But they can cushion the blow by making the package more palatable. Monetary-wise is important, right? So, giving them a proportion of their bonus, for example, prorated part of their bonus, being understanding that they may have unvested stocks and considering whether accelerating stocks is an option that the company can consider, right? Being prepared to be flexible in terms of what they offer. So non-monetary, you asked me earlier. So one example is the insurance. Another example, and this comes up because it hits home very, very closely for most employees, is the post-termination restraints, what we commonly call the non-compete clauses. Non-solicitation of clients, understandably, companies need to protect. Non-compete clauses very often are drafted too broadly to be enforceable at law anyway, right? And most employees, they don't have legal advice. They feel as if they are bound by these clauses, and that really hampers their chances to go out there and find jobs within the industry sector they're familiar with, within the types of roles they're familiar with. So some consideration as to, okay, are we going to waive the non-compete clause? Are we going to narrow it down, restrict it, for example, instead of, naming all potential competitors under the sky to one or two key competitors? Showing compassion in terms of understanding that they need to find alternative employment, I think really does help.
Wow, well said. How about you, Seow Hui?
Yeah, and just picking up on what Amarjit spoke about around the calculation formula for retrenchment pay, 2 weeks. Lazada was offering 2 weeks. I'm actually sympathetic when companies do that because I think the Singapore government has been a bit schizophrenic about what employers need to pay, what they need to do in the event of a retrenchment. So the government guidelines do say that you can pay anything between 2 weeks to 1 month's salary multiplied by years of service. And when clients ask me, what is a guideline? I'll tell them it's a guideline. It's not. And then the next thing they'll ask me is, if I don't follow the guidelines, what will happen? Right? Will I get fined? No. Will anybody go to jail? No. Will I be taken to court? I think the answer is also no. So then, understandably so, companies feel that they are at liberty to adopt the lower range. So I think I am sympathetic to companies who do that, and I think it's probably time for the government to make a statement on this, because it's better to be clearer than to leave a lot of these things unsaid.
Maybe someone from the government is listening to this, so thank you for sharing that. And actually, indeed, a lot of it revolves around advocacy and, just raising awareness of these issues that are being felt on the ground. So now that we've said all about the sort of the negative side of retrenchment, what are some cases of retrenchment which have actually gone really well? Seow Hui, you have some examples to share?
Let me just say there's no retrenchment exercise that's happy. It's often brutal, emotional, for all sides involved. But I will say this, the one time retrenchment was carried out and it touched my heart was a very famous airline. During COVID period, aviation industry, as you know, was going through a slump and they had to let so many people go. But I think what stood out for me in that retrenchment exercise was the presence of management, the presence of the CEO on the ground. You often hear stories of people being marched out, right, with their brown box of belongings. But in this case, I think the CEO came down, he shook the hand of everyone, regardless of, where you stood in the hierarchy. He spoke to all of them personally, and he told them that each of them was always welcome back when the aviation industry picked up. So I thought that one had a lot of heart, and I will always remember that retrenchment exercise.
Yeah, and that was done with dignity and grace, and actually acknowledging the contributions of the staff, because it's never easy to let go of staff.
And when business picked up after COVID, they did go back to seek out the people they let go. So I think that's a testament to the sincerity of what the CEO said.
Yes.
You're always welcome back here, and they were indeed welcome.
Yes. And the three of us here, we are all managers. We manage teams. So I'm going to move us slightly into an adjacent topic. It's about letting people go. So not exactly retrenchment, but still terminating staff. When it comes to this particular climate, I find that there are a lot of employers using the bad economy as a reason to let go of staff. So my question is, should we call a spade a spade? Is it actually doing the employee a disservice by not telling them, actually, you know what? Your performance is not up to mark. That's why we're letting you go. No hard feelings. Or is it easier to just say, hey, it's the bad economy?
Conventional wisdom will tell you that that's the right thing to do, because it saves face for the employee. It saves face for the employer as well, in a way. And especially in situations like law firms, if they can pay something, to call this a retrenchment and put an end to the matter, it seems like the convenient thing to do, the easiest thing to do. But I've seen it backfire, so I wouldn't say it's absolutely foolproof. Years ago, I did a case where the Singaporean had his employment terminated on the grounds of redundancy. Okay, and he was paid his package. It was a fairly generous package, so he got his money. He signed his deed of release. I think a month later, he found out through the grapevine that his role had been replaced. And the person replacing him was a foreigner. And it was a foreigner from the same country and of the same race as the manager who made him redundant. Right?
Wow.
So he was upset, and he made a complaint alleging that he was selected for redundancy unfairly. He was selected because of his nationality. So TAFEP looked into it.
Can you elaborate what's the name of the organization that looked into it?
TAFEP.
Yes.
The Tripartite Alliance for Fair Employment Practices.
Okay, thank you. I know that, but I don't think all the listeners know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a government watchdog for fair employment practices. So they looked into it, and lo and behold, the company's position wasn't actually to defend so much their decision to replace with a foreigner. They actually said that the real reason this person was terminated back then was poor performance. It wasn't actually retrenchment. And they called it a retrenchment to save his face.
But backfired so badly.
Yeah. My thoughts, rising from this case was, I challenged myself, because there was a time where I found that I could advise employers to just take the path of least resistance, but then you see how it may not work so well all the time.
And I think for anyone listening to this podcast, you must know this is not legal advice. Every single case is very different. Depends on who you're speaking about, the circumstances.
Yeah.
And so if you need legal advice, sorry, I'm sorry to say this is not free legal advice. These lawyers, they charge by the hour. Yeah. So I have a follow-up question on this whilst we're on the topic of poor performance. A lot of companies adopt this thing called PIP, Performance Improvement Plan. Is that helpful in proving that maybe someone is just not up to par? Because I must say that as a manager myself, I've had to put someone on a PIP before, and the person improved dramatically. So actually, I believe it's on me. I wasn't clear in communicating what I needed from this role, and the person is thriving in his role now. So when it comes to PIP, Performance Improvement Plan, what are some of the pros and cons of implementing something like that?
Okay, so picking up from your point, Shulin, I think PIPs only work if there's a genuine commitment on the part of the company or the manager, as well as on the part of the employee to make it work, right? To be open to feedback both ways sometimes, and to understand what the actual gaps are in performance in a very specific and clear manner, with, again, very clear steps on how to try to bridge those gaps in order for the PIP to actually work. But the more cynical application of a PIP is usually for companies to be able to document that there has been poor performance, which in many cases would invariably lead to an exit for poor performance. Now, the reason this is often done is because if a company is letting someone go for poor performance, they take on the burden of proving that there has been poor performance, which means they have to produce records, evidence, etc., in support of the same if challenged. And the PIP is often used for that. So many people, when they're put on a PIP, they are not necessarily as motivated as they should be, because they realize that it's an avenue for the company to manage them out. It is one step in what is an inevitable process of an exit.
And Seow Hui, what do you think about that?
Just like my answer on your previous question, whether you should call a spade, there is conventional wisdom, and my experiences have taught me that maybe not. PIPs, yes, absolutely. If you want to keep a paper trail, as Amarjit has pointed out, it's important. So do it anyway. But we've really come across PIPs that are not meaningful. Not because I'm not talking about the cynical attempts. I'm talking about not meaningful because there's just certain things, certain performance issues that don't lend themselves to a PIP. For example, if the concern is that this employee is not getting along with colleagues, right? This employee is a little bit curt in the way he or she behaves. How do you PIP that? Right? You can't, it's rather artificial to put in goal setting in the PIP to say that 1 month later, I expect you to be enjoying your colleague's company, I think.
To smile more.
Yeah. It's quite artificial, it's quite forced. So I guess my answer is PIPs are good for certain things, not everything. And I think we really have to be quite selective if you don't want to waste your time.
Yes.
And you don't want to waste a person's time, because in the case I was talking about, the employee at the end of 3 extended PIPs felt that, well, there's nothing else more I can do to improve my PIP behavior. What do you want me to do? Are you using this PIP to get rid of me? So
After 3 PIPs, he finally realized that.
no, I think it definitely started out with good intentions.
Yes.
But I think if you don't employ it in the right way, good intentions can also be misconstrued.
And I'll use this phrase I heard from one of the podcast guests, that the pathway to hell is paved with
Good intentions.
Good intentions, yes.
Always.
And you can always have the best intentions, particularly as a leader or a manager, but might not land in that way. But I will say I've had good experience with PIP, even though I didn't know it was a PIP. I was just trying to get the person to improve.
Yeah, you see, at the end of the day, the PIP is just a piece of paper. And if managers, and granted, not everyone is a born manager or born leader, but at the end of the day, if there's a desire to coach, there's a desire to improve on the employee's part, you're really off to a very good start.
Yes.
PIP or no PIP.
Yes. And I think most leaders are not born natural leaders. I certainly am not. And I'm always learning. I'm still learning. Well, all 3 of us are learning, right? So my question is, when do you know that as an employer, as a leader, as a manager, you've actually given your all And instead of going down from 1 to 2 to 3 pips, when do you know you need to draw a line in the sand and, really have that uncomfortable conversation?
Okay, I think it's critical for us as employers and managers to know when to call time on a relationship, because otherwise we can continue in this unhappy, uneasy situation indefinitely, potentially, right? 3 pips, 4 pips, and that is a waste of resources, time on everyone's part, including the employees, and it gives rise to frustration. And I think it erodes at the well-being of the team generally when this process is happening. So it's important to know when you've really tried your best, the employee has tried, or they haven't tried, then even more reason to say it's time to part ways. But it's never an easy decision, but sometimes it's important to take it sooner rather than later to avoid things deteriorating further.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. Because the thing is, speaking for myself, I can be sometimes too sentimental for my own good. I always see the good in people, but actually sometimes it's better for everyone, for the morale of the team, to call it quits. It's harder to do it, but it's better to pull the band-aid off, right?
Agree.
Shall we, any views on this?
I think I haven't learned when to call time.
Oh, it's a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah.
We need to buy her lunch and she can share with us more on this topic.
Yeah, but I think I think there are a lot of factors. It's not so simple. Some companies, some business units have luxury of time, right? For the, I guess, people with performance issues to get their act together. Well, some organizations don't have the luxury of time.
Yes.
Then it looks that the pressures are very different,
Absolutely.
right? Or sometimes it's just a question of, young people like to say vibe, right? Can I vibe with you?
Young
Yeah.
people, you mean Gen Zs?
Yeah. Yeah, I when I applied for a job, I certainly didn't think about whether I could vibe with the boss. So it can be a very mysterious thing, very very hard to explain, right? And then sometimes it's also a question of what is out there, because if the hiring market is generally good and there are plenty of options, then I agree with you. It's probably better to cut them loose early. But when times are not so good, you might want to hold on. So it's a tough one.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, tell me when you've learned it.
When I figured it out. But really, I think every single person, every single case has so many unique factors, right? You really just need to weigh everything out and then make that decision. I actually know many very senior HR and very senior lawyers who today still struggle with making these decisions. It's actually better to do what Amarjit said, call time. Because when it festers and it keeps on continuing, you have someone who's underperforming and unhappy. Unless the person is completely not self-aware, the person knows it. And then you have other people who are pulling their weight, drawing salary, and then just wondering, hey, why is this person still here?
Yes, but anecdotally, right? Just observing the cases I've handled, most of the time, and that's why it gets complex. Most of the time, the person in question isn't severely underperforming, or has engaged in some form of unforgivable misconduct. Because in those cases, it's easy call. All right, majority of the cases, the person is a little bit off the mark or off the mark, but sometimes there are other redeeming qualities. So that for individuals like that, it's a tough call.
Yeah, it is. So on this topic, I want to go on to the next question about leaving on a good note. Is that possible? Because we all want good leavers. The market is very small. We don't want to burn bridges. Is it possible to preserve goodwill when you're terminating someone?
I think that really depends on the circumstances of the termination. So if it's acrimonious or there is unhappiness, then it's less likely that, they will continue to be civilized going forward. But I think if parties involved are mature and sensible, and as you say, Shulin, they realize small industry, Singapore is a very small place.
Yeah.
And they make a little bit of effort to be decent to each other going forward. I think it's very possible to coexist in the same space and still be able to have a friendly dialogue, or have a coffee at some stage. So it's not a foregone conclusion that every exit is an ugly exit. In fact, many of them are actually fairly, if not cordial at the point of parting ways, they develop a better relationship over time.
Yes. I mean, it's rare, but like there are, people who invite their ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends to their weddings, right? Yeah.
Yes.
What about you, Seow Hui? What have you seen?
I never invite ex-boyfriends.
Okay, good to know. Well noted.
No, I think it's definitely possible. I think that when we part ways, and often there are many reasons behind that decision, the ability to signal to the other person that I still care about you, I care about where you end up. And this can manifest through actions, right? Like putting in a word with the next employer or making inquiries where possible. It goes a long way because the person may not be suitable for your organization, but they could thrive elsewhere. I've seen it happen so many times.
Yes. And that action actually, interesting you mentioned that because I recently have been getting more calls from employers saying, hey, Shulin, do you do outplacement? Can you help someone out?
Yeah.
Because we're not going to keep the person, but we want to make sure that she can find a job. And sometimes it just is an hour call, a coffee to guide the person on how to put together a CV, how to prepare them for an interview. So that's a very well appreciated gesture.
Yeah.
And that can go a really long way.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So just on the R word, actually, it can also mean recruitment, right?
Oh, yes.
What is your view on candidates revealing to prospective employers the fact that they've been retrenched?
Very good question. And I get this question a lot. When someone gets retrenched, their first instinct is to hide the fact that they were retrenched because it's very paiseh, very embarrassing. And some of them don't even tell their family members. Some of them continue going to work, right? Continue going to work, but they're hanging out at maybe Golden Village Cinema. Okay, the thing is, on a more serious note, if you have been retrenched, you should always reveal it at the first instance if you're interviewing with someone. The last thing you want to do is they find out from an ex-colleague of yours, an ex-boss, the market in Singapore is tiny, or the worst thing is when they ask for reference checks, you can't even provide a referee because you want to still continue hiding the fact that you were retrenched. So the very first instance, you should say that you were let go, provide positive references, and if you're working with a recruiter, such as myself or any of my colleagues, the recruiter is able to manage the message to put you in a more positive light because it's potentially embarrassing to say that, hey, I've been let go, because the first thing someone would assume is, oh, is this a red flag?
Yeah.
Was it because of your
exactly.
performance? But there are certain situations and factors which are completely beyond our control. So I know of people who have been retrenched and let go. Marie Myeskoff is a good example. She was in season 2 of After the Bar. She was let go from her job, not once, but twice, from 2 different companies. One was a company which was bought over, circumstances that are beyond your control. She's thriving now in another role. And the thing that she did differently was she was very upfront. She immediately said that she was let go. And she asked for her community to support her in securing a new role. So my advice is always to be upfront, be frank, and don't ask, don't get. Ask for the positive reference. Ask for the introduction. And ask a recruiter to help you if you can.
So you see, there's always life after retrenchment.
Absolutely.
And, I know many people have been retrenched, and not a single one who have moved on after retrenchment actually ever looked back with regrets.
Yes.
In fact, most of them look back at the fact that the day they were retrenched and they go, I'm glad that happened because
Yes.
I've been able to forge new pathways and move ahead.
Everything happens for a reason. I always say this to the lawyers and the candidates I work with. A rejection can be God's protection. Even if you're not religious, you can take it as every closed door presents an opportunity. Yeah, and many other doors will open. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We'll continue to dive into this conversation after this short break. Please don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a thumbs up on YouTube. It will really help us achieve our goals to make a bigger impact on the community. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Okay, so Amarjit, before today, you and I had a discussion about Glassdoor. So Glassdoor is a forum where former employees can go to post positive and not so positive things about their previous bosses and the companies. And my question is, if someone discovers that, oh wow, my ex-employee has gone to Glassdoor and posted all kinds of defamatory things about me, is there any legal recourse?
Okay, so in terms of legal recourse, it's fairly limited because the purpose of its existence is to provide a safe space for employees to share their views, to review their workplaces, essentially, right? To rate their workplaces. And it's on only very rare occasions that I've encountered Glassdoor being amenable to taking down those reviews. Okay, it's not something that they engage in lightly because it would undermine their entire platform. So it's only in very clear circumstances where, there's actually a legal issue at play, legal concern that they would entertain. Otherwise, I think the company should take a deep look at their own practices, look at the reviews and see how they can improve actually, if nothing else.
Yes. Okay, interesting. Have you had any experience with Glassdoor?
I should go and look if I'm there. I've never actually looked. But I just think that if you found out that either yourself or your firm has been named in Glassdoor, either directly or by inference, I think the worst thing to do is to raise a stink about it, because it actually puts a magnifying glass on the issue that you really don't want people to talk about. So yes, I would agree with Amarjit. If something like that has been said about you or your company, I think the best thing to do is to look inwards.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really great advice. And actually, when I'm a recruiter, right, and there are people who say, oh, I'm not going to apply to this company because of the Glassdoor reviews. I said, literally very few people with positive experiences would go on Glassdoor and say, hey, I love working for this boss. They pay me so well. I'm so happy. It's very rare.
Yeah.
It's only the ones who complain, just like restaurant reviews.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, putting aside Glassdoor for a moment, how about social media? So if someone posts all kinds of silly things, let's say, in fact, I know of someone who, let's say, I will not name the person, obviously, but she had a former employee basically approach a number of people on LinkedIn, and it was a really long message posting very unflattering things about this person. And look, this is not something which is within her control, but it does portray a very negative image of her now. People talk. What would you do in such a circumstance? What would you advise someone like that to do?
See, that's a very tricky question. It goes back to what Seow Hui says, right? Do you want to engage in it and kick up a stink about it and publicly confront the person who's sending these messages or saying these unflattering things? Or do you want to just continue doing what you're doing and let your work and people who know you speak for you?
Absolutely.
Right? I think that's one way. So you take the sort of
Take the high
the high
road.
ground, the high road, and just continue doing what you do rather than taking this on head on.
Yes.
Really. That's one way. I mean, generally, as advice to employers, put in place damn robust social media policies to try and avoid this kind of stuff in the first place. But if it happens, then, it's a tough call. Some people feel like they need to stand up for themselves. And I can understand why they would do that. But generally, the PR teams would tell you, don't take it on head on unless you
Yeah.
really need to.
Yeah, got it. So just to round off this discussion on Glassdoor, if the published remarks are completely false and defamatory, are there grounds for legal action?
So the problem with Glassdoor is that these reviews are anonymous, right? And you don't actually know which employee has put in those reviews. So the first problem that arises is, how do you identify with certainty who it is? I mean, there are certain ways using forensics and whatnot to try, but it's a challenge to definitively say so and so made the statement, and then thereafter to take legal recourse against them is a whole other step, because defamation is not one of the easiest claims to pursue.
Yeah, and also, those living in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. For example, if what offends you is a statement in there that you don't pay well and people are overworked, how would you ever prove that that was untrue? By revealing your entire pay scale in a court of law? I think that you have to look at the overall impact of litigation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. And that's one of the most common complaints. Oh, people are overworked and underpaid if you
Yeah,
scroll through
I would think so, right?
Glassdoor. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I'm going to move on to this topic about remote working. Okay. I've had an experience once where I mean, we have 3 days, 2 days, 3 days in, 2 days out. And I always just assume that people are working at home or maybe at a cafe somewhere. But turns out I had an ex-colleague whom I'm on very good terms with. So she will be fine in me sharing this story. She was actually working in another office. And, I was concerned because my assumption is that when she's working at home, she would take care of the confidential data. And, people are not going to listen in on her phone conversations, which are of a confidential nature. I'm just curious now in this age of where we're still navigating remote working, although there are many employers now who want everyone to go back 5 days in. But assuming that there are still remote working policies, how do you navigate a situation where, potentially someone could be putting your company's confidential data at risk?
I think that's a very relevant point. And Shulin, to your point that your ex-colleague was working in another office, you might have read, this has been all over the papers in the last week or so. There is someone in the US who was eavesdropping on his wife's calls.
I know, I saw that.
Senior executive at BP, and he made a $1.7 million in profit by listening in on the tips during her calls.
Yes.
And he's actually being prosecuted by the SEC as we speak, I think, for this
Yes.
offense, right? And the concern is about, because remote working is now part of the way we work, it's about teaching people the rules of how to do it in a way that doesn't compromise the company's confidential information, sensitive information, etc., right? Whether they are at home, of course, even at home, they may need to take precautions, right? Or elsewhere, in a cafe, etc. And I think putting in the policies is one thing, right? So most companies now have good remote working policies. It's about teaching people simple things like, if you're stepping away from your laptop, shut the lid, right? Or log out. If you have sensitive documents and you take it back with you, make sure you keep it in a place that's not accessible to others. Or if you're in a cafe, please don't, put your documents all over the table.
Your
when you go to,
affidavits.
your affidavits when you go to order your second coffee,
Yes.
right? You don't leave it unattended. It's teaching simple things like that, and also helping employees understand why it's important for them to ring fence the company's confidential information, etc., when they are out and about. Or when you're on a call in a taxi, don't name the people, right?
Oh,
Anonymize
absolutely.
the people, anonymize the situation. Simple, practical things like this, I think, will go a long way.
Yes. And I mean, for the record, I had a really good conversation with my ex-colleague. And yeah, in the end, we managed to navigate that very easily. The thing is, because she was upfront with me, there are situations where, maybe people are remote working. You think they are at Pasir Ris, but maybe they are in Bali. How do you navigate that?
But does that affect, work product?
Well, for me, I think it's all about being transparent. So like I have my colleague Tessa, she works remotely 3 weeks a year in Spain because that's where she's from. I'm perfectly happy with that. I have another colleague who works in Malaysia remotely part of the time. And that's because we communicate. I think the problem lies in when there's no communication and the assumption is that person is in Singapore. Oh, but the person is somewhere else. What's your take on that, Seow Hui?
I'm not a fan for work from home.
Yes.
Not, I mean, yes, I mean, this breach of confidence risk is one thing, but I like being in an office with people. It just makes the workday so much more fun, and I'm surprised and a little bit disappointed that no, not everyone sees it that way. I think people like to be at home, but to me, I think the best work is done in a room where everyone is just contributing ideas. That's dynamic. You're really moving fast and you're actually understanding each other a lot better.
Yes. I'm actually writing an article which will be published in March by the Law Society about remote working and what the law firms are doing, what the corporates are doing, what the banks are doing. Everyone has a different take. I personally am a fan of at least one day out of a week work from home. That's me. And every Thursday, I'm promoting my company and how good it is. But on every Thursday, we have a wellness Thursday. We knock off at 4. So Thursdays, I usually work from home. What about you? Do you like to have some?
So I like a fair balance between work from home, remote work, and work in the office. I still think there's tremendous value in meeting clients face to face.
Yes.
So client meetings are almost always face to face if they are in town and it's convenient. I also think there's value in connecting with colleagues. So some face to face interaction is important. But my team is generally very good working remotely. And as an example, to your point earlier, Shulin, about colleagues working overseas, I have an associate who was newly married actually, and her husband was posted overseas in Europe. And she asked me, actually, can I accompany my husband to Europe? And, at the risk of losing a good associate, which we never want to do, my answer was yes, let's work out the nuts and bolts of the arrangement. And I think we can make it work. And I think trust and openness was at the heart of that, because we then agreed that, okay, she was very sweet to volunteer that she will work Singapore hours. So every day she'd log on at about 10:30, 11 at Singapore time. So, okay, first 2 hours in the morning,
Yes.
it's unrealistic to expect her to wake
Of
up at
course.
some crazy o'clock in Europe. But we made it work during that period because we were very clear about expectations. And I think that we need to be open to this as we continue to evolve in terms of the way we work and in terms of preferences. Because some people, like Seow Hui, has a very clear preference of being in the office. There
Yeah,
are
I do.
others who have a very clear preference on being remote. And my worry is that if we lack the flexibility to adapt to different people's working styles, we may lose out on the chance to hire good people, work with good people.
Yes.
So I think there is a need to, if we do have to work with people who want to be in Bali, for example, right? There are all sorts of, visas coming up. Japan, for example, is giving a remote work visa. I think we need to rationalize how best we can do it. Otherwise, you may lose a chance to work with people who want to be globally mobile.
Yes. I will say that I probably, I think with Seow Hui on this end of spectrum, you're here. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. As a business owner and as a recruitment consultant who I have to meet people at very short notice, right? I need to be able to jump on a call and I need to be able to grab a consultant and say, let's go and meet this client together. I can't do that if that person is in Bali. There's no way. We can do it on Zoom, but the impact is very different. So I want to have my cake and eat it. You know what I mean? That's how I feel. Any last remarks on remote working from Seow Hui?
I think people must be quite clear that work from home means work from home, not work from anywhere. So I think it must be clear that if you're permitted to do this, then do it from home.
Yeah.
Please don't go to a cafe. I'll be very uncomfortable.
Yes. Unless that cafe is in your own home. So, okay, I'm going to ask about what's your opinion on the upcoming workplace fairness legislation? So in short, WFL. So I'm going to read. The WFL seeks to build fairer, more harmonious workplaces, and they are going to protect the employees from discrimination, ensuring equal job opportunities, and fostering a culture of open reporting and positive employer practices. As with any change, there may be teething issues. I'm just curious, what are some ways employers can ensure that they are compliant with the upcoming WFL?
Okay, so to your first point, I think this is a very welcome move. It's a step in the right direction, very much overdue from my perspective, actually. So, it's about time. And what can employers do? I think a lot of the MNCs already have in place all the right policies, but I think it's the SMEs who probably need to take a look at their policies to make sure that they are adequately updated to cover non-discrimination, non-retaliation, right? Because as part of this upcoming legislation, companies are required to put in place grievance procedures, which means they should probably have whistleblowing lines, they should have appropriate reporting channels, etc. And as part of that, to ensure that those who complain or raise concerns are not retaliated against, it's critical that they have in place non-retaliation policies. Now, policies are well and good, but very often they are left unread. Most people have no idea what they say, right? Sadly. So you need to train your people, right? That we have a culture where we are not going to tolerate discrimination. We are not going to tolerate retaliation. We want a safe space where people can raise their concerns and not be punished for it. I think that's the more important part, to actually try to change the culture and get people to adopt this from their hearts rather than from their minds or just because they have to under legislation. And I think that's what is going to make a difference in terms of whether this just remains paper pushing exercise, something people do as lip service, or whether it's actually going to change the way we work with each other. So I'm head of DEI at the firm.
With us, KhattarWong.
And with us,
Yes.
KhattarWong. And I think this is something that is critical and that we've been lacking in Singapore. And my hope is that it will help us transform our workplaces at a genuine, sincere level, to be able to accept people and include them. And not just not discriminate against them, but to go further than that.
Yes. And actually, my mission is to transform Singapore's work-life culture. That is not work-life balance. That's different conversation. And I love what you said about how a lot of handbooks are just handbooks. And employers assume that, hey, you know what, it's in the handbook. But it's about communicating it and actually ensuring that the culture has a shift. And it's really about how you interact with people, how you behave, how managers implement certain things. So Seow Hui, what about you? What's your opinion on the upcoming workplace fairness legislation?
Yeah, so if you've been listening to the podcast until now, you'll know I like legislation. So
That's clear.
yeah, no, it's very welcome. And I echo Amarjit's point about this being overdue. But I will say this to all the employees: rejoice, but don't over rejoice, because the legislation gives you rights, but as a lawyer, I'm always thinking about problems with proof. And to my mind, that remains one of the challenges. And to employers, don't panic. I don't think that the introduction of the legislation is just going to make workplaces or our society necessarily a more litigious one. I wanted to address this point about the rise of litigation being one of the concerns that have been put forward against or not in favor of this legislation. It's perhaps a little bit myopic to say that with legislation, then you're going to see a flood of litigation. There are lots of reasons for litigation to be brought. There's lots of explanations for the incidence of litigation. One is deep pockets, right? But the employees, even with the legislative framework, would they have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to bring the litigation, right? Number two, it's also the problem with proof. I'm constantly thinking about that. How would you prove that that employment decision was motivated by discrimination against a protected characteristic? And even in mature jurisdictions like the US, UK, and Australia, where anti-discrimination or workplace equality legislation has been in place for decades, still you see the same problems with proof. You can always assert, but at the end of the day, you have to prove.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be a challenge, right? So the thing about this legislation, while it's most welcome, whether it really engenders huge change or the extent of that change in our workplaces and our society, it really remains to be seen, because we're, after all, an Asian society. I wouldn't be surprised, even with the legislation, there are employees who choose to put their heads down and just move on, even though in their minds, no doubt they have suffered, an injustice, but just seems easier to move on.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of times people just want to close the chapter nicely, and it will be the rare circumstances where it actually does lead to litigation. And that's something which can get unnecessarily acrimonious, ugly, and it's not good for either party.
Yeah.
So thank you, ladies, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And before we wrap up, we always do a rapid fire round of questions. And I'm going to get right to it. Okay, what's your favorite book to give to friends?
I think last Christmas I gave you a book called Big Feelings.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. The same authors have another book. It's called No Hard Feelings.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's about how to manage your social emotions at work.
Yes, interesting.
So,
One would even give it out at a retrenchment exercise.
oh my God.
I'm joking, of course. Okay.
Okay, so my favorite book is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
Oh,
It's a
nice.
collection of prose poetry on thematic topics.
Oh, nice. And how about your favorite restaurant?
You know, my family and I like to go to this place called Savor 716 at SIA Sports Club. So I'm making a small plug for them. It's halal, and they serve Chinese zi char, which is my favorite food. And
Me too.
yeah, right, it's the
Yes.
best. And Indian food. They do very good naans and curries.
Okay, so
So
you're making me so hungry.
Yeah.
It's the best of both worlds for me and my family, and we always find ourselves going there when we're in a big group.
Very nice. Mine is Lateria mozzarella at Duxton.
I
They
know
do
that
an
one. Yeah.
amazing burrata. Love it.
Wow, love it.
It was very hard for me to choose one restaurant, by the way, but I tried.
Okay, you had to just choose one. If you weren't a lawyer, what would you be?
I'd be a food critic.
Ooh.
Okay. I know I like working with my hands, so anything that involves use of hands, carpentry, art, or maybe some sort of design type thing.
So do you have a motto or mantra that guides you when it comes to the world of employment law?
The devil is in the detail.
Nice.
Okay, so we the team actually has one, and we distilled it after I think a whole day of coaching by my former boss and mentor Susan De Silva. I think we all went somewhere in Spain. It was a global retreat, and we got together, and then we distilled our purpose in the work we do. And I think we came up with this just to see the human in everything we do.
Wow. And what are you looking forward to the most in 2024?
I think for it to be a peaceful and uneventful year, really.
Yes.
Yeah. No big. There's no big plans or events for me this year. I think it just I am looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the everyday.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, ladies, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I've learned so much.
Thank you, Shulin.
Thank you. You know, actually, I should thank you because Amarjit and I have found ourselves on opposing ends. So she's received love letters from me and vice versa. And you've created this platform for us to meet. So thank you.
Wow.
It's wonderful
Yeah.
meeting and getting to know Seow Hui. Thank
Yes,
you, Shulin.
and actually it's high time the two of you met.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you've enjoyed this podcast, then be generous and share with all of your friends, family, colleagues, rate it, review it, and follow me on LinkedIn. You know what? Follow both of these ladies on LinkedIn. So Amarjit is from With Us KhattarWong, and Seow Hui Go is from Bird and Bird. She's going to update her LinkedIn profile after this. So see you on the next episode. Bye. And there you have it, a deep dive into employment law and retrenchment. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to both Seow Hui and Amarjit for being so generous in sharing their knowledge. I would love to hear your thoughts about this episode. So please drop your comments below if you're listening to this on YouTube and hit that subscribe and thumbs up button. If you're on Spotify, hit that follow button and give us a 5-star rating. I'd also really appreciate if you could share this episode with your friends so we can continue making meaningful content like this. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next episode of After the Bar.